Time now to welcome in our special guest this early morning, Houston Cougars sharpshooter Emanuel Sharp, a senior this year. Emanuel, really appreciate you hopping on Countdown to Game Day with us this morning.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
You've seen it all, man, like whether it be playing in the AAC, the transition to the Big 12, and then dominating once you guys have gotten there. But this is a new year, and obviously the fourth year in the program for you. Talk about this iteration of the Houston Cougars and how you guys have gotten off to such a fast start.
This group's a lot different. We got some more young guys, so it's been a process from the jump. But that's the good thing about the school is the process has been the same pretty much. We integrate the younger guys, get our culture situated, improve our leadership over the summer. I think that was a big point this summer as we were growing is, we got to have voices on the team. That's the good thing about this program is that every year we've had a good leader or good leaders, plural. Last year we had Jawan and LJ. Year before that was Jamal. Year before that it was Marcus Sasser. So, just having people, especially the seniors, the older guys, being there to talk with the guys and keep guys uplifted because the coaching's not easy. So it's been a process since this summer, but the good thing I think we're getting better right now, and I can feel it.
Talk about a list of players there, Bruce. I mean, LJ, Sassa, that's
Every year.
ridiculous that you
Yeah.
just listed off there, Emmanuel. But last year, you guys obviously made it to the national title game, and you mentioned like off-season voices stepping up. What other lessons did you guys take away from reaching the national title last year, going into this year? Because I know obviously the goal is to win it all.
I would say the main thing I learned just going through that deep tournament run was how hard it is to win just a single game. People talk about, getting to the Final Four, getting to the Sweet 16, but with us, it's really about focusing on one game at a time because it's really hard to win a single basketball game. I think that's underrated. Uh, but you gotta get up for every game. Every game, especially in the Big 12. Um, every game is a game that you can get got. Like I know you see a bunch of upsets. Uh, every day you have to bring in the right energy and the right attitude because every team can beat you, and in the tournament, getting up for every game is important. We had a tough run. We played Gonzaga, Purdue, Tennessee. We could have lost every single one of those games, but we had the guys on the team to come every day to practice with the right attitude and the ability to get up.
Now, Emmanuel, you talked before about how this year's team is younger, and Coach Sampson has said that starting two freshmen, and he's talked about the difficulties of it. What is the difference for you in playing with two guys who had never played college basketball before?
I mean, that's it right there. There's not a lot of college experience, so how they react to certain situations or how they come to practice. It's all tied into their experience, and at the end, no matter how good they are, Kingston, Chris, and Zay are some of the best players I played with. But at the end of the day, they're still freshmen, so they're gonna need some guidance at the end of the day. So they just need somebody in their ear uh, to talk to them, other than Sam, to talk to them, let them know what's expected of them, and to keep them, on a straight line throughout the season. Because there's a lot of bumps and bruises throughout the season, you know, mentally, physically. Some people get up and down. So, the other players on the team got to be there for them to help them.
Now, Coach Sampson, you've been with him since 2022 at this point. Obviously, one of the best
Yeah.
coaches in the country. What makes him so special? And then, obviously, he's very intense on the floor. You have any funny stories about him? Anything that shows his personality a little bit?
Um, I'm trying to think of one that I can share on here. It's not. I don't think it's a specific story, but or first I say what makes him such a great coach is his ability to get players to reach a type of potential or get something out of them that they could never get, out of themselves. I feel like he brings greatness out of every player that he's coached. I mean, he's done that with me for sure. Um, but he's got that ability. He coaches hard, but it's with love. As the longer you play for him, you realize that you gotta, ignore maybe some of the yelling and the cussing, and because there's always a deeper message under it, and that's what he's doing it for. You got to be able to decipher some of his coaching, and find what he's really trying to tell you. Because at the end of the day, he wants to win, just as every other player on the court does. So, and you got to match his intensity, but I'd probably say, it happened, a couple weeks ago. I made a bonehead play. He's screaming at me, calling me all kind of names, and then as soon as he gets done, he's like, all right, make sure you guard the best player. Like, just he's right back to business. Right back to business after he gets done yelling. It just shows that he's really just in the moment. He's really he's intense and he's up for the moment. So he might just say things in the heat of the moment, but he's right after he gets done. He's right there telling me my matchup and what we got to do on offense and defense.
So you guys got the rare Sunday game in the middle of the season tomorrow. So
Yeah.
no game today. What does the day look like today? Will you consume any of the other basketball games that are going on the slate today?
No, I mean not really. Maybe later. At the house, I might check the scores or turn on a couple games, but we're really focused on Arizona State, and that's really what it's been the past couple of days. Real focused. We take the scouts real serious, so just watching as much film and as getting locked into the scout report as much as possible.
Last but certainly not least, obviously we know your history growing up with parents who played at the professional level. Obviously,
Yeah.
going and experiencing that, I'm sure you learned a lot from them. But who were some other players maybe that you took pieces and parts from their game to emulate as you got older and matriculated through the game?
I would say growing up, I didn't really take from other players as much, but because I had great parents. They were really involved in my basketball career, just give me pointers. But I don't think I started pulling from other players until I got to Houston. And I had leaders, like I said, all those names I've listed earlier. I pulled something from each one of their games. That doesn't have to be offensively, but I looked at Jamal for his defense. I had him as a role model because he was defensive player of the year. He's probably the best defender in the country. So, taking pointers from him, with my shooting ability, I got to play with Marcus Sasser and LJ Cryer. Those are two of the best shooters that you will ever, find. So, like I said, each year is just pulling bits and pieces from, the guys that I have in front of me.
Make sure to tune in again, ESPN, 6:30 Eastern Time tomorrow, Sunday. Houston and Emanuel going to be taking on Arizona State at the Fertitta Center. Really appreciate you hopping on again. Best of luck the rest of the season. Stay healthy.
Thank you. Thank you.